So our next topic is Castle Hills annexation. I'm going to have Eric go through some of the history of Castle Hills, just for the audience that may not be fully aware of our relationship with Castle Hills. And then Brenda's going to talk specifically about some of the financial analysis that is still ongoing. So what we're going to show you is certainly an incomplete product, but we wanted to give you an idea of where staff is on this particular topic. You gave us direction last year to proceed with the election, and that was certainly held and was successful. But there is a lot of work in front of us, so we want to talk about the financial analysis and then those next steps that staff has taken to look at additional impacts for each and every department in the city. Eric?
So the Bright property obviously has been intact out east for quite some time, in the early 50s. And in place, you'll see that if you look back when 121 was a 2-lane road before SRT, Brights raised cattle. They had agricultural up toward 121 with cotton and milo, maize, and some corn, but times have changed. So the family came to the city before 96, but around 94, 95, and started talking about wanting to develop the lands, but needed services. At that time, it was county, and there was no water, there was no sanitary sewer, very limited electricity to the area. So they came to the city of Louisville, ultimately entering into a development agreement in 1996 that the council approved that laid out a very complicated matrix through time, how the lands would be developed, what services would be rendered, and how they'd be rendered. So we've been working under that 96 agreement ever since. There's an attachment to the 96 that has, if you will, it's kind of a large informal PD back then, but variances, uniquenesses to their development that are still bound to that document. City consented to the creation of water districts with mirroring that with public improvement districts within the boundaries of that. They also issued bonds, secured the taxes within those districts. Brenda's going to talk to you about that in depth here in a few minutes. Again, we as staff operated the development side of the 96 agreement, really working through final plats and preliminary plats with construction plans as a staff normal review, and then those plats would go through the Planning and Zoning Commission, and if there was, and the Planning and Zoning Commission would ultimately be approving those. If there were variances to those plats, preliminary plats and development issues, then it would go on to the council for consideration of the variances, and we still do that today. At the time, again, this is county, so there's no zoning. So there was no zoning subject there. So in the development agreement, there's a land use plan that lays out, if you will, acreage for multifamily, areas for business, areas for single family. So it's not site specific like you'd see in other cities, but it does address that. So Brights or the landowners would pick a zoning classification such as general business or light industrial or R75 that gave those front, side, and rear setbacks, and put that on the plat so that when annexation occurred, it would match and line up with the typical layout with regard to street right-of-way, alleys, and the normal requirements that the city of Louisville had. And we've been doing that, and it's worked out quite well. Again, the line drawn in the agreement, the city basically stops at final plat. That's the end of our permit powers, is the plat. The Denton County Freshwater Supply District formed, in essence, a building inspection department. They issue permits. They review the engineering site plans. They do all the construction inspections of water, sewer, streets, and drainage, on-site fire lanes, sidewalks, the buildings themselves. They issue architectural building permits, fence permits, sign permits. We do a courtesy review with them, with staff, to make sure that it's a good mold. Through time, we found out that's a better thing than find out after it's built. So we do a courtesy review of the engineering site plans. The Denton County Freshwater Supply District, their employees do all the architectural review of single family, multifamily, and commercial. City provides fire and EMS and police services and sewer services under separate contract. Again, the lands, you see the 8 districts here on this map. This is 544 in this area here. The city supplies water to the areas north of 544 up here. Upper Trinity, they wholesale and they supply water down south of 544. We treat their sanitary sewer, whether it's coming through a pass-through to the east through Castle Hills, ultimately back to the city of Louisville, or otherwise generated by Castle Hills. We treat sanitary sewer and have been during the duration of this time. Again, the development agreement outlines a long-term initiative for executive housing and also lays out the timing and speaks to the timing of annexation. Again, I think the overall idea, especially to our citizens in Louisville, that annexation should occur at the time that the debt gets to the level that it does not affect the base tax rate for the city of Louisville, for their other residents. And that's the direction you all are going. Okay, where are we right now? Right now, the population, it's estimated, because it changes every day and every week, we know that, they're sitting at about 14,000 people that are living in Castle Hills right now. I don't know if this is going to work very well, but you can't see that. But the light brown in this area is 1B. That product of single-family residents has been on the ground starting in 97, 98. For the most part, this is built out. Where we'll be around 2030, 2028 to 2030, you're looking at about 4,300 single-family houses, about 6,300 multifamily, inclusive of mixed-unit multifamily units, somewhere in the neighborhood of 28,000 to 30,000 people at build-out, 2028 to 2030. So that's where we're going, so we're about halfway there. The pedal to the metal, as Chris Bright would say, is in this purple area of 1H. 1G is the yellow, I believe. This area here is corporate campus. So this area here right now, you've probably got around 600 units of apartments starting here, going south. The mixed use to the north is going to come out of the dirt fairly soon. Right now, staff primarily deals with Freshwater District, but the brothers, Clay and Chris, are both working these properties with some of the Bright families, but Bright Properties, Bright Company, Bright Co. There's several entities, but that's where we are today. At this point, Brendan's going to take over and run you through some numbers.
All right. Next slide. So, providing here for you some stats since the last time you looked at it, our last retreat. You can see that the value in 1 year's time has grown out there, as you probably were well aware of. Average home values increased. We're at about $480,000. And notice that as the value has increased out there, they have been able to lower their tax rates this last year. The lowest last year was 74.25 cents, and this year the lowest one 69 cents. Now the value has been able to keep up with a little bit of the debt, but you do see an increase in the debt. And to remind you, in 2017, they brought back a couple of issuances for you to approve. 1G ended up issuing their last remaining authorization bonds, so they cannot issue any more debt. And 1H, who is still developing right now, they issued some bonds this last year, and that's the reason for the growth. Now, when planning for annexation, some of the initial considerations have always been, are we going to annex one district at a time? Or are we going to group some of the districts together and annex them in groups? Or can we annex them all at the same time? Obviously, there's some pros to annexing everybody at the same time. It does reduce confusion out there as far as who is governing them, who are providing services to the residents. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to a plan that makes sense for our current residents as far as what is the cost and the benefits of annexing those districts out there. Next slide. So you could really take all those districts out there and really put them in two groups. You have the developed districts. This is 1B, C, D, E, and F. They're pretty much developed. They have a very mature type of value on the ground, very stable. They've got, as you can see there, close to $2 billion on the ground. And that is more than sufficient to cover their debt service payments every year. They're not increasing their debt. They have no more authorization. They are simply just making their debt payments every year, and that debt is slowly going down. The other group is 1G and H, like Eric mentioned. These are the mostly undeveloped districts. We don't have a very mature value on the ground. It's in its infancy, and it is expected to have a lot of value out there, but right now there's just not a lot of value. But you have a lot of debt being incurred because the public improvements are going on. They're putting in roads, they're putting in the water and the sewer infrastructure. So that debt is increasing at a higher rate than their value right now. Even when looking at what they plan on issuance debt-wise in the next 2 years, they still have a big portion, over $76 million, that they have authorization for to issue debt beyond the next couple of years. So one of the things, like Eric mentioned, one of the things that has remained very constant is the city council has always said, you know, we do not want to annex one district until there is absolutely no impact to our city of Louisville residents. Our current residents are right now have a tax rate of about 43.6 cents. We expect that to not increase because of Castle Hills. Now, I will remind you, we are very close to issuing our debt on our multi-generational center. And if you remember at budget time the last few years, we've reminded you that we fully expect having to increase our INS rate portion a penny for that. That is a large debt issuance, and in order to pay for that center, we're going to have to issue, probably increase the tax rate. Now that 1 cent is well within what the voters authorized in 2015. We told them at that time it would be no more than 1.7 cents. So we're going to keep it within the 1 penny, but that will mean that this summer you will probably be raising your INS rate to 12.7 cents, but you'll be keeping your rate for the general fund stable. We don't expect an increase there, and it'll stay at the 32 cents. So total, we expect to end up with 44.6 cents of a rate later on this year. Now if we annex around the 2021 year, which is a year that we have projected that we probably could do that without any impact to the tax rate, we think we'll still be at that 44.6 cents in 2022, and that rate will be the same. It will not fluctuate due to an annexation that may occur. Next slide. So in 2022, we projected our tax revenue. You know, we've got that 17 million going over to the INS fund, and remember that portion pays your debt service. So that's going to end up paying the debt service of the city's debt like it does normally. It's also going to pay for the debt service associated with 1B through 1F, those developed districts. It's going to pay for their road debt that's associated with the roads that they have built out there. And then that will leave the remaining of 43 million there for your M&O rate, which has always been at the 32, or been very consistent at the 32 cents. Now that piece of that second pie screen right there, 7 million of that represents the amount going to the M&O that is associated with that 1B and that 1F value just coming into the city. So that those values come in, and you've got the 17 million paying the debt service, but the amount going to the general fund, about 7 million of that is represented of or correlates to the amount of value coming from 1B and 1F. So, you know, that becomes the piece of the pie that we have to work with. We know with annexation we're going to have some increased costs, increased workloads, increased costs due to annexation. And that becomes a piece that we can use to tap into. Next slide. You know, there's some other revenues, though, that we haven't lost sight of and that we're still analyzing. But right now, the districts collect permit, inspection, franchise fees, and some other revenues. And these revenues will be going to the general fund as well. So when you take that 7 million extra that's over, coming from the property tax of 1B through 1F, and the additional revenues coming into the general fund, about 4 million, we are looking or projecting around $11 million worth of revenue that'll hit the general fund. First, like I said, we'll be using it to offset costs associated with those expanded services of adding those residents in and those additional costs that will come to being able to service that area. You know, at the same time, we are, you know, the biggest cost component to annexation, the biggest negative to the annexation is the debt piece, right? That's the biggest cost element. And so we may be able to mitigate that or lessen that impact a little bit with that revenue as well. We may be able to pay down the debt. There may be a portion of debt we want to pay down. As Eric mentioned in that one slide, you know, Castle Hills is in some parts getting over 20 years old, approaching 25 years old. So there may be some infrastructure needs that we want to put some money back because we know there's some replacements coming up that we're going to need. Bottom line, in the general fund, with this revenue coming over, you're going to have some flexibility there to kind of mitigate and bridge some of these costs to make sure that the annexation at the end of the day does make sense for us to carry forward and move forward with.
Before Brenda moves into the TIF plan analysis, I just want to make sure you're clear. So what happens at annexation is that the debt that we've issued for Castle Hills, remember that's our debt that we issued, is being actually paid off by the taxpayers in Castle Hills. That, at annexation, we actually reissue that contract, what's called contracted revenue debt, and it becomes GEO debt. And the cost of that debt drops dramatically because of our triple bond rating. Does that make sense? Okay.
Very good. So if you remember about this time last year, the developer had just come to the city and said, listen, we know that 1G and 1H is a problem with annexation. Why not you look at a new structure instead of the structure we have now, which is a water district layered on top of a PID district, and take away that structure and replace it with just a simple TIF zone, a tax increment financing zone approach. And what that means, the basic piece of that is that we create a financing plan, which you have revenues coming into that TIF zone, property taxes, and you have cost going out. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that's a balanced equation, that you have enough sufficient revenues to pay for any outlays that you may have. So next slide. It's a long-term plan. You know, this debt piece it takes a while to pay off. So we have looked at a 30-year plan. Now on the expenditure side, the first thing that would happen is, like Donna said, on the 1G and 1H side, we would also refund that debt. We would get it as low as possible using the city's credit worthiness, and we would just make it as efficient as we could, and that those revenues of the TIF would pay the debt service of that debt every single year on that. So instead of right now, next slide, instead of right now where you have the developer out there putting roads in, putting the water infrastructure in the sewer, and then they come to you and say, hey, I'm ready to issue debt to pay me back. Instead of that approach, they will just continue to put the infrastructure, put the public improvements in, but they'll wait for the TIF to have available revenues to pay them back. So we'll take the property taxes that go in, the revenues that go in, do the debt service every year to pay the existing debt, and then whatever monies are left over, this will become the pot of money that pays the developer back. No more, we do not anticipate any more debt being issued under a TIF plan after it would go into effect. So we expect this to, obviously they're going to be out there still putting in the infrastructure and everything, and we expect over the 30 years, obviously, the value and the growth to to go and increase and go up. Next slide. Now, on the revenue side, there are various options, and this is part of what we're looking at. We're trying to look at every single option here. The city participates by, we establish a TIF that at the first year becomes a base year. And then every year, as value is added out there, that incremental difference times our tax rate becomes the revenues that go into that TIF. Now, the county participates in our other two TIFs. So when we're working up our first draft here, we're anticipating that they will participate as well. So their county, those property tax revenues times their rate is going in there as well. And then the first thing we're doing is then taking the debt service out and then looking to see, is there available revenues to pay the developer back. So some of the preliminary results of our first draft. When we did the annual revenues, and we anticipated a 75% participation rate. The city and the county can participate at 100% of those revenues, or just 75% of the revenues go in and the other 25 is kept. That can be, those are variables that we're going to be looking at. But on the first draft, the annual revenues at 75% do not cover the existing road and utility debt service, even after refinancing and getting that debt as low as possible. So that was a stumbling block there. Another thing is when we take the utility debt, remember for Louisville, typically what we do on our road improvements, if we have to finance, if we have to issue debt, that's where your INS rate pays for. But for improvements such as water and sewer public improvements, if we issue debt, your water rates and your sewer rates pay for that. So if we carve out and say just the road debt is going to be paid through the TIF, then it does work. Those annual revenues do pay down the road debt, and there is money each year available to provide a reimbursement amount to the developer as they're adding more and more public infrastructure. Another item we found out is it does not work. The plan does not work without county participation. Just having the city's revenues, the equation just simply doesn't work. So our next steps with the TIF plan for 1G and 1H is we have started working on the water rate study. We have gotten some consumption information, and our rate consultant is looking at those numbers and starting some preliminary work. We've got to make sure if we're going to push that water debt out to the water and sewer rates, can they handle it? Is that, is the rates at an amount that's reasonable? So we've got to check that out and take a look at that.
Council, also remember that because the water source is different for Castle Hills than it is for the city, Upper Trinity is actually supplying water there, we can actually have two separate water rates. So that the Castle Hills, it would not affect the water rates for the city of Louisville current residents.
Yeah, it's a different customer class is what they would be. And because of their consumption too, they are a different type of customer. So we may have two different classes and two different rates that we may have to work on. Adding the complexity of the analysis, more and more work to kind of look at, right? So we've also got to visit with our county officials on the TIF plan because it does require some participation there. Do they have the appetite to participate with another TIF with us? What is that percentage? Are they wanting to do, would they participate at 75 or more? Or would they want a sliding scale? With our other TIFs, they participate at a high percentage in the early years, and then as the TIF gets older, that percentage goes down. They keep more and more of that money. So are they going to want that? And we're going to, as part of this update, we are looking at the plan all the time and updating it to make sure, does it make sense? We want to bring back a plan. When you see a final plan, it's going to need to be workable. It's going to have to be reasonable. Is there a good chance that it's going to actually be feasible to do? So we're going to add in some conservatism elements there. In 30 years is a long time. We know we're going to have some no-growth years, some years when the economy slumps. We want to make sure that we have allowed for those type of situations in the plan.
Brenda?
So I'm going to turn it over now to Keith, and he's going to talk about infrastructure. I'm sorry.
Can I
Yeah.
sneak one question?
Yeah, sure.
Have we ever done any analysis on where we are as far as TIF participation with the county and other municipalities in the county?
Not a study. We hear about what the participations are with various other entities and their TIFs that they have, but we have not actually like polled or surveyed yet, I don't think.
Not aware of that. Are you talking about what?
Well, how do we
the
stack
city of
up?
Denton might do?
Yes. What's the city of Denton doing with the county? What is Flower Mound doing with the county? Highland Village? I mean, I would think that would be important to understand, because if we're overly high on participation with the county, that would be something the county would look at and go, why are we doing all this with Louisville and we haven't done it with these other towns?
Yeah, we can certainly look at that. I mean, the county has been very willing to participate in our TIFs in
Sure.
the past. I'm looking at Nika. Are you aware of any participation with the city of Denton?
I'm not aware of any of the city of Denton. They haven't approved a TIF actually participating in a TIF in the last 5 years. We are, to be honest, they have participated in our TIF at a higher rate than other places
Okay.
in the past, but it's all on case-by-case basis.
We just have the best projects, Council.
Well, and that would be a great thing to bring to the table. Hey, we got another great project coming. I'll take two, right?
All right, I'll try to be quick here. Just a brief impact on the infrastructure. Brenda and Eric both talked about infrastructure. Kind of what we know. We've been in the community out there. We've looked at the visible surface features, and we do know that the streets are in good condition. Much of the infrastructure is in good condition. The one thing that we do know from the visible analysis is that the curb ramps are mostly non-compliant. Y'all are aware that we've been pretty aggressive within the city of Louisville improving our ADA accessibility, our curb ramp project. We've done a good job of that. We'll have to continue that in the Castle Hills area. The wastewater collection system, when y'all approved the I&I study that we've recently had going, we did put a meter out there where the Castle Hills sewer flows into our system. So we are doing an analysis of how is their wastewater collection system in terms of inflow and infiltration. How much rainwater are we treating with that? That'll give us an idea of the integrity of that system. But other than that, we've not been able to do any analysis on their subsurface improvements. So Gina, if you go to the next slide. We do want to do much of that analysis. We need to map their utilities. We need to go through and see what all they have that is their maintenance responsibility, their ownership responsibility, that would be transferred to the city. That includes not only all of the utility and streets, but also any parks, any other facilities, mowing, maintenance, those sorts of things. So Eric has been working with the district and is working on putting together a map that includes all of that infrastructure. But I will be coming with a public services action step in the neighborhood of $400,000 for next year's budget to begin some of that analysis, some of that mapping that will let us build going forward a capital needs inventory, an operational needs inventory of all of that subsurface, as well as all of their pump stations, lift stations, their infrastructure that we have not been able to assess yet. We haven't been in contact with the district staff to try to gather all of that information. When we do get in contact with them here in the coming year, we will try to get a better sense of what do they know, what maintenance have they performed, what actually do we have to go out there and study versus what can we get a good sense of the condition based on the maintenance and operations that they have done. So that's about all I have on the infrastructure.
So, again, next steps, as far as the property, you're looking at about 2,900 acres out there in general, and most of it's been intact since day one. So as I said before, one of the first steps we'll have to do is look at the zoning. We'll probably have to pass this mega ordinance that will adopt those that are in place and set forth the future path. We have to deal with zoning on the lands. One of the first things, we'll look at our 5-foot strip around Castle Hills, so we'll be looking at that. Right now, services, as I said, Denton County Freshwater Supply District is doing the inspections, plan reviews, and a lot of maintenance and service to the community out there. We will take steps after this retreat to sit down with the staff at Denton County Freshwater Supply District. They've been reluctant to do that. They've been a little nervous that word's getting out that annexation is coming and will I have a job or not. I'm sensitive to that, or we are, but the business is the business. We need to start getting in there and looking at their infrastructure, their as-built plans, their data, all of their information and how they operate. They've got HOA, and they've got several levels of HOAs. They have architectural plan review boards and things. There's public land, there's semi-public land, there's HOA land. So there's a lot to do. We won't do that in 6 months. It's going to take every bit to 12 to 18 to do that assessment. So we will have to go down that road, and they know that. Right now, the county is supplying your animal services. The Denton County Fire Marshal is servicing that area. The state has very limited inspection of all the restaurants and food handling. So there's a blend of things that have been going on out there, park maintenance, whether it's contract, whether a freshwater district does that. We've got to roll up our sleeves and get involved. You know, the staffing issues, equipment issues, service, everything we'll be looking at in cost. You'll see a bullet up there that the chief has provided, that 3 additional officers and equipment. You see the dollars there, but those are the types of things we'll be bringing to you all to present in future budget years and this, that, and the other. Keith will do a complete water study, again, the infrastructure studies, and we'll know what we're getting into. We own the water, sewer, streets, and drainage right now. They're our asset. I'm very nervous that we did not inspect those. We didn't have the ability to do that, but I feel confident that we'll come out okay. We're going to analyze, again, all costs, but we'll refine the TIF plan, and we'll be sitting down with the county commissioner over this area, Ron Marchant. We did talk to Bobby Mitchell first, and the next move will be to talk to Ron, it's not Rashad Marchant, about the upcoming schedule annexation.
Mayor and council, it's not often that a city actually annexes in another smaller, fully functioning city, and that's actually what we're talking about. So this is really, in large part, a math puzzle. So we have to figure out when it's right for the city of Louisville, when the financial impact is not a burden to our residents. That's step one. But there's so much more to understand. We don't want to enter this blindly. We certainly want to know what the impacts will be to our water sewer capital plans. We want to know that when we take over Castle Hills, what kind of impact it's going to have to our animal shelter. We have so much capacity. Do we have capacity at our animal shelter? There's many, many, many questions that need to be asked. And so I wanted to give you a full picture of that today, to let you know where we are and that what the next steps will be. So if you have any questions, what's next?
Donna, it's my understanding, Donna, that this is an item where the staff, all the report you just heard is on track for the schedule that you had previously discussed for this. So really, there's not a decision that you need to make today. It's more a matter of making sure you know exactly what's going on.
That's correct. That's correct.
Ms. Martin mentioned 2 districts that were problematic.
The
G&H.
one G&H.
Okay, what is the problem with those?
The problem is that they are in their very early stages, and the value on the ground, I don't have to tell you this, it's not mature yet, right? So I think 422 million right now, but they've had to issue a lot of debt already because, the first thing of a development is the public infrastructure that goes in before houses and businesses and everything come and increase that value. So they're at a stage right now where that value alone can't support payments of their debt alone. So they, right now they're the ones at that dollar tax rate. And at times, they've limited to that $1, but sometimes the developer has to bridge even some gap there when their debt payments are a little bit more than that. So it's eating away. I mean, and we certainly don't want to annex in and go to a dollar rate. So in order to stay at our 44 cents, then, you know, like she mentioned, like Donna mentioned, the equation doesn't balance, so we gotta look at how we can get it to balance.
What, do they have any plans in place now on the annexation of those two areas?
So that's why they requested the TIF, and we are working hand in hand with them on the TIF.
So right
that's-
now, they're not close to being annexed.
G and H could not be annexed.
Not in the same method as what we
It's-
talked.
It's separate from the other districts.
It is.
We are looking at it separately, Mayor.
Just want to make sure we have that.
Yeah, and as Dawn and I have discussed, at the end of the day, it may prove that, oh, we can annex G, but we can't annex H right now at all, you know,
There's
It's a
lots of
moving
things
target.
that could be happening.
Yes, sir. We've got to analyze them all and the impacts.
Other comments, questions?
Just one, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but after seeing some pretty catastrophic pump failures in Castle Hills, I worry that that reflects the overall maintenance that's been done across the board.
We certainly have concerns, and that's why Keith will be looking very closely at that.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, so the staff will continue updating you on that.